They call the meeting to order, and if I can have a approval of the minutes.
So move. So move.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Well, public comment is, Mr. Winger has just walked in, Councilman. Councilman, we're up to public comment if you choose to make any comments. In chairman's manners, just to review a couple of items here, best I get my glasses out. On May 7th, I made a presentation to the City Council on the two recommendations we made in the minutes. One is to recommend that the approach to the budget as presented by the staff would be rifle shot and not across the board. And secondly, to refinance the water sewer bonds as recommended by the staff. I presented that, plus an overview of some of the issues and concerns, considerations that we had discussed at our meeting. On June 11th, I made a presentation to the Recreation Committee, not as representing the Finance Commission, but analysis I did of the comprehensive recreation programs. And I thought that perhaps I could review that after we get into the rest of the items in the meeting in terms of just how wide and how deep and how extensive the recreation programs, a lot of which is below the surface for the other entities of the city that are serving and supporting recreation, such as Public Works when they're putting up barriers, such as the police when they're having to work overtime. As you know, many of the events in the city are on weekends. They're on holidays. And so when any of the staff, so it's not only recreation, and I was going to cover that a bit. I had asked Sherry to send out a copy of the presentation that I made, but it was just for information purposes to understand the scope of and the cost, total cost of recreation, which added to the police in the current budget. If you add the police, the recreation, and the parks component of the that used to be in recreation and was moved to Public Works, that's over half the budget, or roughly half the budget. So that just to put it in perspective.
When you say half the budget, half of what budget? What do you say?
Half of this year's 2013 budget, it comes to about $8.3 million out of $19 million. But next year, with any proposed cuts, and of course that has to be impacted, and that's going to be dealt with the proposals that the City Council is going through.
No, let me understand. The recreation budget, as we know it, is around $1.5 million.
No.
Well, that's the line item, is about $1.5 million.
Yes, but it is also another $1 million that is transferred, over $1 million, transferred from the general fund to the recreation fund.
As I recall, I'm doing this a little from memory, but I think it's about $1 million. The gross revenue is around $1.5 million, and about $300,000 is generated by themselves, leaving about a shortfall of about $1.2 million in my head. And that $1.2 million is funded by the general fund.
Correct.
Correct. So, okay, I'm trying to extrapolate from there to $6 million. That seems like an awful large figure. Now, I agree with you. The police department there's buried costs in the police department. There's clearly buried costs in the streets department because they do have to put up the barriers and they do all this for the parks. That makes sense, but I'm having a hard time how I jump from $1.5 million to $6 million. How do I do that?
No. I say adding both the police department
Okay,
and the
but
recreation.
Right, but I want to be fair to the recreation department. I mean, without the recreation department, we still have a $6 million police department, plus or minus a few officers. Yeah, we might get down to $5 million, but saying there's $1 million of the police department allocated to the Parks Department is probably a little heavy, but I don't know.
No, well, there was 900,000 was in the previous years was in parks, and the parks piece of recreation was moved over to the general fund under Public Works. So,
but we're talking about the recreation part of the cost of running the city. And we have said at this committee that it's really unfair to charge all the lawn maintenance and the park maintenance to the recreation department, when in fact the city needs it just for aesthetic purposes. And I think you made that point.
oh, absolutely.
Okay, so
Yeah, my concern is that, and it was a consideration which perhaps is, and we've discussed this too, is we're calling recreation a enterprise fund.
correct.
And the enterprise funds, and we've discussed that before, were originally set up to be business-like. And the fact that, as you're pointing out, Glenn, the revenues for recreation don't cover what
Absolutely
the expenses.
not.
So
No.
a consideration would be downstream is to not call it a enterprise fund, but to move it to the general fund.
And we've recommended that. I would agree. We got a cost. It's really hard to see what the cost of the recreation fund, because it's over in that distribution. But we've talked to you about that, and you've highlighted that maybe we were going to change that a little bit this year.
Well, it's a couple of things. My understanding was originally made an enterprise fund because there were some contributions from the county that came towards recreation, and so they wanted to make sure that the recreation function and all the associated revenues were segregated, so that there was some clarity as to how their funds were being expended. Certainly we could roll it back into the general fund. We are allowed to have an enterprise fund for the purpose of exactly that, of seeing clearly what something costs and what revenues apply to it. I think my take on it was, at least for the coming fiscal year, let's not do that, because that will definitely obscure our whole other discussion, because there'll be $1 million come and go, just like we did last year. So we can certainly do it, but if we could hold off another year, there's no reason we have to, because once you fold all that together, recreation will be a department in the general fund. All their revenues will be subsumed into the revenues in the general fund, and it'll maybe take away some of the clarity as to what really comes in against recreation and what really goes out. So, if we could hold off, that'd probably be best.
And I read your report on and I think you did a great job on that. The probably, if you could have added to that situation and I think in fairness, you could have said to them, the recreation department, that we a city does an awful lot more recreation than any other city does. And maybe the general public, the taxpayer of the city, doesn't really realize how much that is. And certainly on a care basis, it does look to me like the city spends much more money on recreation than other cities do.
Absolutely.
And in this year's budget, I sort of looked at it and said, it is on a quality basis, where should the city cut? That would have been up the stairs a little for me, leaving the police department a little down the stairs, because it just looks like we could have moved more money out of the recreation department, cut it a little deeper, and salvaged a little more of the police department. But that was just a quality question to my mind.
And that's why, rather than us speculate, I was trying to, all of us point it out so that the city council can take not only issues that we've discussed, but also from the public, because the public is going to, and the taxpayers are going to weigh in on exactly what they need. And we recall last year, Jim, you know well, when you tried to touch the third rail wire, which was cutting 3 lifeguards in your proposal as directed by the council to shave cost. And there was quite a pushback. So it's not going to be easy. We understand that. And so, but it is the council's direction, the majority of the council, to go forward. And that is what the staff has done, and that's what we're considering.
That's what reflected in the budgets, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Scott, you have any comments?
Not at this time. I will a little bit later.
Catherine?
Well, I know it would require more work, but I wonder if in the budgeting process, some things could be budgeted based on event or program. So it would be easier to see exactly what's being provided and maybe easier to cut.
Actually, without doing that in the budget framework itself, I know that there have been a couple of times, and last year included, when Rob Slezak, our recreation director, did provide some backup material that lent itself more to like what you're talking about. You know, these are the kinds of things we do, and here's what they cost of our total budget. I mean, I think he provided that to the Recreation Commission last year, so we can see if we can find that again, or if he has a similar analysis
It would
this
be
year.
easier maybe to cut some costs if you saw exactly what the programs were, who they were servicing.
And I believe, and Jim can jump in here if I'm wrong, I believe that Rob did some of that in his discussions with the Recreation Commission these last couple of times in terms of his proposals as to how to either cut things or enhance, because we talked about this, enhance the revenues so they came closer to being user-supported.
That's exactly right. That's why you oftentimes read about, for example, the tennis. We've identified what those real costs are. It's not just the tennis pro that's out there. It's the individual who sets up those tennis programs are also associated with that. A great example is what's coming up in the next couple of days, the 4th of July. It's a city celebration. I'm not sure there's any department that is not touched by the 4th of July. If you look at our overtime now that we've renegotiated our police contracts, probably the greatest event with police overtime is the 4th of July because, I mean, we cover both bridges. We hit the entire roadways on both sides of the river, besides the activities taking place in the park. So there it's one of those, and that's a city-sponsored function. We do not, I mean, we do have a sponsor, but a portion, and they take out a portion of the direct cost of shooting the fireworks, but does not touch the ancillary cost of the various departments that are involved. And I just use that as an example since it's coming up, but in many cases. So we have identified activities, and I think Rob's done a very good job of identifying the true cost of activities in the Recreation Department as they're associated with those functions. For example, the Leisure Square. He's identified all those costs that are there, the electricity, the manpower that's there, the security that's required, and that kind of stuff. And so, again, in our upcoming budget, one of the things we've done is reduce the number of days that the Leisure Square will be open. Last year, we reduced the number of days that we heated the pool, and it saved us about $1,500. I think it was $1,500 a week or something that we saved on just not having a heated pool during that period. And we were able to find an option or an alternative for residents to go to at St. Ed School, as an example. So we continually look for those type of options and alternatives. Now, some folks don't like that because they're sort of accustomed to where they go. But and maybe we can find what Rob had picked up and those associated costs with those activities.
Well, you know, I'm sure the Recreation Department's looking at this, but what I'm thinking more in terms of, okay, this is Leisure Square, but what is actually going on there? You know, you have swimming programs, and what age are they servicing? You know,
he has that for both adults. Yeah. I think he's broken that down to the different functions. And again, I use tennis since that's the one that seems to have gotten the most notoriety right now. He's broken that down to the cost of not only the tennis pro, but you have to have backup services to schedule the people who are going to go with that. And then when we have a tennis match, we have to have somebody schedule that. So he has broken those numbers down in his budget preparation.
And I think had some discussion with the Recreation Commission about
Yes, he
those
did.
breakdowns, program-specific discussions with them about things like Little League and Leisure Square and things. So we'll see if we can find some of his backup.
And gone into a lot of depth on that with the Recreation Commission. For example, Little League, using that again, since Cindy brought that up, I mean, he identified every cost: the cost of emptying the dumpster, the cost per hour of the lighting that is turned on. So, and then he also measures the number of kids. He has the number of kids that were involved in those programs. And we do have a pretty good snapshot of the percentage of kids inside and outside the city.
And just put that, not counting Leisure Square, not counting the programs, not counting Little League, there are over 270 events that the Recreation Department, whether it's parades, whether it's Veterans Island, whether Jim's making a point, Chief Curry told me that they expect between 15 and 20,000 for the 4th of July throughout Riverside Park and the city. The city itself is 15,000. So that just gives a scope. And of course, it's a holiday, so it's overtime for everyone, which doesn't count the preparation with the flags and the banners, and then the cleanup after it. So that is part of the entrails that I think that we're trying to at least scope out to say, so that the public will understand exactly what's involved with the amenities that the city is providing.
And in case there's a crook watching this, we patrols east, west, north, and south of the community as well as Riverside Park.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, the next item on the agenda is electric utilities update. So I didn't give you much chance to relax.
I needed the exercise. Just an update. We did have a meeting on June the 26th in which Florida Power and Light, ourselves, and FMPA met, and we covered a variety of issues, tax issue being one of those, and that's primarily the contract between OUC and FP&L and how to address that issue. We also had discussion on the cost associated with us getting out of the all requirements. As you know, we sent a letter asking for an itemized statement as to where those costs are associated. We had a discussion about that. We also talked about in the contract there's a Section 29B we feel gives a lot of flexibility to FMPA to help work through the process. We went into some detail in that and trying to address the concerns that FMPA has indicated and shown up to this point. So it was about a 4-hour discussion, and again that we went through and tried to address and all the points and counterpoints. We had a portion of the meeting that was just all three that would be, and it was telephonic with the FMPA, but we had FPL and ourselves in the room. FMPA asked for FPL to leave the room so we could discuss some of the issues. For example, the all requirements contract. FMPA feels like that FPL should not be a part of the discussion as it relates to the contracts between the city and FMPA. So we honored that request, and they did leave the room, although we were located in Juneau at the FPL offices. Some of the things that I did want to go through just to make sure that everybody knows, and it was probably 2 years that I was standing in front of you or some meeting at the time saying that this was going to be a very long and protracted process. It's not a sale that I have a piece of ground that I want to sell to you, and it's just a function of getting an appraisal, and you're a buyer, a willing buyer, and I'm a willing seller, and you make that. And even under those, the closing usually takes a protracted period of time of a month or so. In this particular case, we have 4 major parties involved. Each one of those parties are going to have to do a SWOT analysis to determine, is this in their best interest? And you probably already know, you have to identify what the strengths are in the city of Vero Beach. We have a utility that we think is marketable. We have found a buyer for that, so that's a strength. One of the weaknesses that we have, we're trying to sell a coal-generated utility in a market that has depreciated the value of coal as a fuel cost. So we have a challenge there. And one of the opportunities that we have is that we will bring lower utility rates to our customers. So we feel like that's the major opportunity that we're shooting for here. And the threat that we have is that our electric utility is probably our largest revenue producer for the city of Vero Beach, and we have historically relied on that as part of our generation for our revenues to general fund and providing of services. But all that being said, every one of us, all four parties, have to go through that same analysis, whether we do it verbally or we do it subconsciously. And I think that FP&L has gone through that, and they have determined it is in their best interest to stay in here. They've identified that. I think OUC has determined it's in their best interest. The makeup and the way the contract is written, they feel like that they are going to benefit from that. FMPA has not come to that conclusion yet. They're still discussing it, and we're still trying to work through it. But it's a reward versus risk, and I think the city of Vero Beach, through our referendums that we've had and through our surveys that we've done, the citizens of Vero Beach have determined the reward is worth the risk of going through the process of doing that. And so I think it's very important that we understand that all four of the parties are going to have to do that analysis to determine if, in fact, it is in their best interest and is the reward worth the risk that is being taken. There's a lot being said about the meetings that we have, and when you have, for example, we had 10 people involved, in excess of 10 people involved in one of the meetings. And if you went down and asked each one of those individuals, myself included, to give the analysis of the meeting, I think you would have 10 different viewpoints as to what took place in the meeting. And to me, that's the critical point to try to get out to the public, that it is a long, very complicated process that we're going through. It's very easy to draw conclusions based on one of the 10 people involved in the meeting as to what the conclusions of that meeting was. And the only thing I ask, if we're, as a community, still convinced that the reward is worth the risk, it is not going to be a short-term decision-making process. It's going to be a long-term protracted. The other thing is I believe that all the parties would agree that we had to have a document in which to negotiate, and that's what we're doing. We have a document. The critical issues that we've gotten across, an example of that would be, how do we contract our power purchase contracts out to a third party that is a qualified third party? And that's very clear. That has to be a qualified third party. I think we have overcome that. But at least we have a document now that we are negotiating and working through and trying to process. We will not have another meeting until August. Fred Bryant, who's the chief negotiator for FMPA, has a week and a half vacation coming up. They have their annual conference, and he said he would not be available during the month of July to meet, which is fine, but the tax attorneys are still engaged in conversations as to what are some of the issues and how do we get across some of those issues. But we will not have another formal meeting until August, and that date has not been set at this point. We have to, as Fred said, he was going on vacation, and when he says vacation means no telephone and no email, and that he was turning all that off, and he was going to be with his grandkids and his wife, and that was going to be the name of his vacation. When he gets back, the annual conference is going to engulf him in that determination. So after the annual conference, we'll start setting future meetings up from there. But I'll be very happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, there's been a lot. I listened to Mr. Bryant's report. It's on the website.
Right.
His report to the board of the FMPA regarding some of the contract issues that have to be discussed. And it's a 28-minute or 26-minute tape, but there are, as you said, very complex issues. And the question is, I know everything's negotiated, but the actual closing date still is not absolutely determined.
Oh, that's absolutely correct.
And I'm not going to ask you for a percentage because
Thank you.
It's being negotiated. And as you said, whenever you get a group of 10 at a meeting, my gosh. And you have tax attorneys, you have attorneys for all of the parties, you have operations people. It's an arduous process.
I would say I've gained a new respect for tax attorneys, but I have learned to listen to tax attorneys, and they're actually known as 103 attorneys if you get into the circle with those folks. And they talk way up here, and for us common folks, it's sometimes a little difficult to do. But what you're saying, Mr. Chairman, is exactly right. It's one of those, and you take the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they have 18 months to render a decision. In the 17th month and 29th day, they can come down and say, we didn't like where that period was in that sentence, and we're going to start our 18 months again. So we have to go through that. The filing with the PSC will give us another state experience on how the regulatory agencies will do it. And then you have the Department of Justice. But theoretically, if you get through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the Department of Justice should not take any time. But then you have the bond, and as Fred pointed out in that conversation, you have a lot of those, but they can go simultaneous. And so it's not something that is, it just, again, it's just a time issue.
Well, I'm not going to speculate at all. Any questions? Well,
Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Jim. Old business. No. The young lady is going to discuss old business.
Actually, I'm under the next one, which is Finance Director's Matters, so I don't know if you have anything else you want to poke in under old business, or we'll talk about what is actually old business under my matters. I apologize for the delay, but I think you have the March mid-year, essentially, quarterly variance analysis. Without going through it in great detail, I think my overall impression after spending some time with this is that if you look at the first page, within the general fund, we have 4 variances on revenues and 5 on expenditures in the entire fund, some of which are positive and some of which are negative. I think what this shows me is that the combination of a couple of years of much more realistic budgeting for revenues and a little tighter budgeting for expenditures, along with the budgetary controls that we've put in place over the last 2 years, what I see here is a general fund budget that at the end of the year probably isn't going to be very far off the mark of where we started in terms of being under budget and having the positive variances in some cases like lower insurance costs or slightly higher ad valorem revenues offsetting a few of the things that hit us like the dune restoration we didn't expect. I ran a real back of the envelope if I were doing a budget amendment scenario. And, frankly, for the general fund, I don't know at this point in time that a budget amendment is particularly critical. And if anything, if we do one in the August timeframe, we may well be able to do one and not actually have to come back in November with another year-end budget amendment just to ensure that our general fund comes in under where we budgeted. So I think that's the good news there. The only place I see a real amendments, significant amendments to the budget for 12-13 coming are in our capital projects funds. And as part of our package for next week for council, we provided some of those updated numbers on where we think 12-13 will end in the electric utility, the water sewer utility, in terms of our capital projects. But kind of across the rest of the funds, other than the issues we're addressing with our electric utility rate sufficiency, I really don't see huge swings from where we started the year that would lead me to believe we're going to end the year eating up fund balances that we didn't expect. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions about specifics here if anyone has them.
I'm in good shape in the budget.
Yeah, the only thing is for the public, you mentioned how there was some concern back in April to take a review to see how the financials were for the rates. Mm-hmm. And have you taken a look at that? I know that the numbers appear to be somewhat firming up in terms of what your expectations were.
A bit. Our plan at this point is to take that analysis with all of the June numbers and the June purchase power costs back to the Utility Commission on July the 23rd. But we did have a couple of things transpire, including another good hard look at our capital program, which has allowed us to reduce, again, our capital expenditure transfers for the year. And certainly the weather has gotten a bit hotter in the last few months, and so we have actuals for the last month or so. We're going to plug all that into the sufficiency analysis and take it to the Utility Commission on July the 23rd is the plan.
But it didn't seem like there was anything in the data I've looked at that is out of line in terms of any concerns.
Not too far off the mark where we sat the last time that we looked at it, at least so far, in terms of we think we'll end the year, without eroding cash and eroding net assets the way we did in 10-11.
I had a question on the overtime salaries in the general fund.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that it's running at 34%, and there was a change in negotiated policy. Is this going to carry through, or when we get to the holiday season, are we going to see a huge bump? Are you going to use this budget up anyway?
Well, actually, probably not, because what happened was last year we adopted a budget that included the salary, the rank reductions, if you will, and overtime as it stood. And after that budget, those line items were put in place, we resolved our negotiations with the police and actually put back the salary portion and negotiated these overtime changes. And so I imagine, if anything, this savings might be offset a little bit by the salary budget being slightly, in other words, we budgeted one way and we negotiated another. But we are experiencing pretty much the savings we projected or better of. I think what Chief and I talked about the other day was maybe $7,000 or so per overtime in lower costs because of the way that we negotiated the application of overtime. So it may carry through, but it may be offset slightly by the salary line item. And again, that's one of those positives that offsets things like the dune restoration we didn't expect, and again gives me comfort at the bottom line that we're looking good.
I just thought that the later months of the year take up more of the budget, because you had mentioned around Christmas or whatever, there's a lot more going on for which they need the overtime.
Right. July, 4th of July hits it pretty hard, but there do seem to be a number more holidays, through that first 6 months of the year around Christmas, Thanksgiving, and all those other holidays. So. Any other questions, comments about this? I know, basically one of the things we were scheduled to talk about is a budget amendment, and I think what I'm recommending at this time is if we do one in August, we'll be fine, and we may well get away with doing one in August and not having to do it again to close out the fiscal year, because I think we're in good shape, particularly in the general fund, in the places that count. And that's the first time in a couple of years I think we've been able to say that with confidence in the June-July timeframe. So,
well, can I have a motion then that we've been asked to report to the City Council on the quarterly review, and at this point, my motion would be that it's on a stable basis and there are no major issues that have to be confronted.
Also move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Now we come to the part that makes my head spin, because that was 12-13, and I've been spending a lot of time with 13-14 lately, and now we're going to set the Wayback Machine to fiscal 11-12 and talk a little bit about the CAFR from last fiscal year. Everyone got a hard copy of it, correct?
Yes.
At the end of the day. I guess I just wanted to point out a couple of things that I think were highlights, and also things that I know we've discussed together before, that I believe as we move into next fiscal year's CAFR and the year after, we're going to have to pay a little more attention to. The first thing, if you look on page 102, and I don't know if everyone has theirs and wants to go there. Speaking of final budgets and budget amendments, at the end of last year, we did a budget amendment that said that we were going to actually erode our fund balance in the general fund by about $775,000 at the end of the year because we made that early debt service payment. I don't know if you remember that, but we refinanced a loan, and we made our October 1st payment in July when we refinanced it. And so we budgeted to decrease our fund balance in 11-12 and restore that money in 12-13. Well, in actuality, because of other savings in kind of across the board in all departments, as well as in our transfers to recreation, what we ended up reducing the fund balance by was only $70,000. So we actually bettered our performance by $700,000 last year from what we had shown in our final budget, and our fund balance in the general fund remains at essentially at $7.8 million, which is a very comfortable number. If you look on page 42, which is where you'll find the statements of revenues and expenses and changes in net assets for all the enterprise funds, there are definitely a few things worth pointing out here. The first one there on page 42 would be the electric utility. And in the fiscal 10-11 audit, what we showed at the bottom of the page, at the bottom line, was a decrease in net assets for the electric utility of $1.9, almost $2 million. In 11-12, we've turned that around, and we are showing a change in net assets, positive of about $240,000. So this is where, we had some concerns from some of the bond rating people that particularly that 10-11 result really didn't look that great in terms of ratios. We pledged to pay closer attention to our rates, and what we were able to do for 11-12 was turn that around by about $2 million from a $1.9 million deficit to a $200,000 increase. The water and sewer system, again, for the second year, is showing a change in net assets, a positive increase in net assets of $1.6 million. As we've talked about in the last few months with regard to 12-13 and 13-14, there are other savings initiatives on the way. We refinanced that loan, all of it with an eye toward sitting with council and starting to have some policy conversations about what we do with the water sewer fund. Do we use this money potentially to move the plant off the river? What kinds of things can we do with the fairly consistent now and significant increases in net assets we're achieving in the water and sewer utility. Both of these funds ended the year with very good levels of working capital or cash. The electric utility has $19 million in unrestricted cash to $73 million in operating expenses, which is about 95 days of working capital, and about 75 days if you pull out the $4 million we have set aside for capital. So very comfortable level there. And as we pointed out when we talked about the refinancing in water sewer, the water sewer utility is sitting, now that we apply that extra $1.8 million to the principal pay down, is still sitting with about 126 days of working capital. And that's, again, after removing the money that's set aside for R&R and capital expenses. So both of these funds are in a very comfortable shape. Have been having some discussion recently with the Marina Commission. Actually, fairly extensive discussions. They've gotten more involved in budget and looking at the CAFRs. This is starting to improve this situation in the marina, and the budget that we're proposing for next year will turn it around so that we should see a positive change in net assets. The bottom line of the issues that the marina had was that for several years there was a find grant that actually supported the payments of the mortgages on the purchase of the property, and that grant was a short-term, like a 3-year thing. And so when that went away, the marinas had to work to climb out of that place where they can cover the debt service with their operating income. And so we think that is turning around, and it'll look good by next year. It should be a positive number. Other than that, I think the next probably two most significant things in this CAFR, page 59. We did have a couple of restatements of prior period restatements, and I want to chat a little bit about both of those. If you see on page 59, toward the top of the page, there are in the middle of the page, accounting changes and restatements. When we closed out fiscal 11-12, after talking with our auditors about it, we actually undertook a very extensive physical inventory of the city's assets in all departments. It was something that hadn't been done for a while. And when we did it, we identified a number of assets which actually had been physically disposed of in prior years, but were still capitalized, and capitalized along with their accumulated depreciation on the books in all funds. Okay. We also identified assets which were replaced by subsequent construction projects, but then never removed. So we had a building that we'd had on the books for ages. Then we tore that building down and built a new one. But for some reason, that building we tore down and replaced was still on the books. Buildings, in one case, for instance, in the park in Humiston, we had an old septic system there that was replaced when they put in the improvements, but it was still there. Old plumbing systems that had been replaced. And the third thing that we found is that I think things were being properly disposed of physically, but as the paperwork came through to finance, there was a period of time where whoever was in charge of removing them from the books, there were just some things that didn't just make it all the way through to being written off, even though they were physically disposed of properly. I think the one I love the most is we still actually had a canine on the books from something like 25 years ago, and we're pretty sure that the dog is not with us still. So, we basically what we did is large and small. We did a huge cleanup, and when we did, these assets, for the most part, had completely exceeded their useful lives, and so they were carried on the books along with all their accumulated depreciation in such a way that when we removed them, the net change wasn't material in any respect, any individual fund or in the aggregate. If you look on page, I'll show you the numbers. If you look on page 65, 66, you can see the numbers I'm talking about. Because, again, for clarity, we actually broke these out as a separate column as a prior period adjustment. If you look across all of the general government assets, not the enterprise funds, the bottom line you see there of that prior period adjustment is $156,000 net out of about $41 million worth of assets. So certainly not material. If you turn to the next page, again, there's that second column, prior period adjustment, totals across all the enterprise funds, $755,000 out of $247 million worth of assets. And if you look back where we were on page 42 at how it hits each of the individual funds, we're talking $140,000 in the electric utility, a couple of $100,000 in water sewer. Again, nothing that our auditors or that I deemed material, but certainly a cleanup that needed to be undertaken. Because even, and I think sometimes there's a tendency to think, well, if it's fully depreciated, who cares if it's on the book? That's not right. I mean, you need to remove the original value and remove the depreciation to accurately reflect what you have in terms of assets in your funds. And so we did that. We had a few of them left to carry forward into this year. All the small items, we removed the biggest ones with the biggest net value, and next year it won't even be a prior period adjustment. It's so small. The other one that's a little more difficult is, unfortunately, for the second year in a row, if we go back to page 59, we discovered that the way that we had booked other post-employment benefits in prior years was still not correct. We have a new OPEB actuary, an extremely qualified one. And although we aren't required to do an OPEB valuation every single year, we did decide not to do one for this particular year. We have to do one for next fiscal year. They did help us as we were moving through the CAFR process. And one of the things they provided to me was a great worksheet on how you really should calculate employer contributions against this OPEB actuarial liability. If you look on page 84, you'll see a little more detail about this particular restatement. And the bottom line is that we went back and used their excellent worksheet and recalculated it, and it turns out that for the past several years, it hasn't been calculated properly. So the total net OPEB that we reported at the end of fiscal 11 of 5.6 is actually about $2.7 million higher. And so we went ahead again for clarity, made this a prior period adjustment, and came forward with the proper calculation of our self-insured contributions. The other reason that we didn't actually redo this actuarial valuation this year is because we anticipate that when they do these calculations for the end of 12-13, we moved to fully insured health insurance. We've made some other cost reductions in terms of the city's subsidy of retiree health premiums, and we're hoping that those changes will help to bring this liability number down, which currently sits around $44 million. The other thing that we've talked about, and this is the area where I'm going to say as we move forward, maybe into next year, we, the Finance Commission and myself, we need to get a little more involved in this, is that the pay-as-you-go method, which is what we've been using, is perfectly acceptable. And certainly you can, if you want to be an accounting nerd, get into the literature and find lots of controversy as to whether the GASB's take on reporting of OPEB kind of steps beyond accounting and enters the realm of policymaking. Because the critical difference between a liability like this other post-employment benefits, which is retiree health insurance, that's all it is for us, and something like pension is a pension liability is a vested benefit that can't be retroactively modified. But employer cost sharing for health insurance goes forward and in many cases has been held even legally not to be on the same basis as a vested benefit like a pension. And so certainly one of the ways that governments tackle these is to continue like we did to try to achieve cost savings in health insurance as you go forward. You become fully insured. You change the cost sharing arrangement. But there certainly are other ways to kind of mitigate this and get it off the books. On the government-wide basis, you can establish a trust. There's lots of ways to tackle this. Our new actuary is extremely knowledgeable on those things, and as we have in the past with pension, I'd like to bring them in and make them part of some Finance Commission discussions, and let's talk about moving forward in the next couple of years to try to mitigate the way this OPEB looks on our books. If you look at the government-wide financial statements, and again, this is the part where you leave the realm of this is how much cash I have and this is what I really spent, and you do all those reconciliations and you put it on a government-wide basis. Unfortunately, for the first time this year, and because of this OPEB, we are actually showing a negative number in our balance sheets. And this is something that we want to, if you look over on page 28, entirely related to that OPEB, we're at unrestricted net assets in our governmental activities of a negative $500,000. Not real. I mean, we're not 500,000 in the hole on anything actual. We have plenty of cash, great fund balances, all that. But as this liability grows on an accounting basis, that number will continue to grow. And so we need to find a way to address that sooner rather than later. And I'd like the Finance Commission involved in those conversations. The other thing that we need to keep in mind, and again, we might as well stay here kind of on page 28, is at the end of, I believe, fiscal 2015, so we have a couple of years, there is a GASB pronouncement that's going to require us to show the entire unfunded pension liability as a liability on this balance sheet, on this government-wide balance sheet. And so this $500,000 at the bottom is pretty much nothing compared to what this is going to look like when we put what stands now at a $40 million unfunded pension liability onto this balance sheet. And so if we assume the electric utility sale takes sale prior to the time that we have to book that won't be a problem. Our approach is we're going to take sale proceeds, we're going to pay down that unfunded liability. Part of it will go away because FP&L is taking liability from us but leaving us our assets. That should be fine. But if we reach the end of fiscal 2015 under different circumstances, again, on this government-wide statement of net assets, which some would argue isn't necessarily representative of reality and certainly doesn't have anything to do with cash or anything, we'll have a number there that's difficult to deal with. So other than that, I don't think it's any surprise. We've talked about it before. Going forward, pension, OPEB will need to be our focus. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about this. We did, just in general, and I don't know if anyone noticed, but undertake an effort to provide a little more clarity in some of the sections here in the way the notes were written. Debt, those sorts of things, we've restructured a little bit to try to make them more helpful.
Is the federal government going to have to put their liability on the sheet too? Just thought.
An interesting one that I hadn't realized is, that
I haven't heard that they were.
There's a number of employers that, have Florida retirement system. And you would think, well, Florida retirement system, pooled investment program, not my problem. Well, apparently, even those people in the Florida retirement system are going to have to take their portion of the Florida retirement system's unfunded pension liability, somehow calculate what their piece of that pie is, and actually show it on their balance sheet.
Well, in fairness, I think probably that's appropriate. You're right.
I think a lot of people thought the FRS was the magic solution to not having to deal with that, and it turns out that's not the case at all. So,
yeah. Interesting.
But will the federal government do that?
Does the state government, though, right? Yeah,
Yeah. They're governed by GASB.
that's what I thought. Mhm.
Catherine?
And that,
With that, the diving through this is very helpful. The way you have clarified a number of the issues and explained them, and it's just that it's so darn. It's just a spider web of issues that have to be addressed, but. It's great that, and certainly, if you want to when you want to bring forward the new actuary, certainly we'll look forward to that. And we also had talked about insurance at one point.
a little bit, yeah. We are kind of working our way through that this year. You know, our attempts to go fully insured completely kind of hinge at the end of the day on, to some degree, on the sale of the electric utility, because there's some elements of our insurance that we're not going to be able to get fully insured until we don't actually operate a power plant, but we're certainly moving in that direction. You know, the other thing is we just hired, or I think you saw this, a pension attorney. And one of the things I liked about them, in addition to their experience converting defined benefits to defined contribution plans, is they also are very familiar with the cities that are dealing with the OPEB issue and establishing OPEB trusts, et cetera, as ways to sort of mitigate the impact on the financial statement. So they may be involved in that effort as well. You know, overall, I think the message in this particular CAFR for me, though, you know, aside from those, you know, kind of policy issues that we need to tackle over the coming years, is a very positive one. You know, we have excellent fund balances in our general fund. I believe that over the course of the last couple of years, with the help of the Finance Commission and quarterly reviews and budgetary controls, we've turned a situation around where, you know, you got to the end of the year and, hey, if you're over budget, you amended the budget into a much more conservative effort to live within a well-constructed budget annually. And our utilities, and particularly the electric utility, we've turned around a negative situation into one where we're not losing ground on net assets, and we have sufficient balances for contingencies. So all in all, I think it's a good picture.
Thank you. Move on to members' matters. And Catherine, any? Scott?
Can we focus a little bit on this budget a little bit going forward? You know, a couple of things I saw in there, maybe you could clarify. When I was looking, for example, at the police department's ongoing budget, okay, going forward, and it appears to me that, and I may be seeing this incorrectly, but it appears to me that we have lost we're proposing to lose 14 employees out of 74, I think. Correct?
Are we talking about the 12-13 budget?
Was that
Are we talking about the 12-13 budget, or
the proposed budget going forward?
The 13-14.
Yeah, we.
213-40. It appears to me we're going forward on a thought basis of cutting about 14 of people out of that department, which, in my calculations, is roughly $440,000 of cost savings.
It's about 600 and something total.
Yeah.
But 10 of those are dispatchers, 4 of them, for example, animal control, and 3 administrative. Mm-hmm.
But then when I look back and to do that, we're implementing a deal with individuals in the Indian River County for some sort of scheduling program.
That's correct. We would.
And I guess we're going into a long-term contract with that community.
Yes, sir, and there's a cost associated with that. We have been working through the Sheriff's Department for the last month or so trying to get some of those numbers. As a matter of fact, Friday, was it Friday? No, it was last night. Last night at about 4:45, we got some final numbers from the Sheriff's Department, but when I say final, there was a few gaps that the chief is working through right now. The spread is going to be probably less than $200,000 to shift the dispatching over there, and that's if we're willing to accept just going into a queue of dispatching officers. If we want to keep ours as a priority, there's little or no savings. The fact of the matter is it takes that many dispatchers to provide that function. The other thing is that we would have a one-time cost in putting the technology into our capital.
That 300-some thousand.
246, and then 305 for operating costs.
Yeah. And that again erodes, especially in the first year. But once you make those technology changes, then it's very difficult, for example, to go back.
Right. So given the fact that the capital costs, we must be moving forward on a sort of an extended period of time, 3 to 5 years, just to cover this type of capital expenditure.
Oh, absolutely. So the intent would be long term. Now, you got to remember this is proposed, and it was the discussion centered on a May the 14th meeting, I believe, that we had, which is a budget workshop. 2 items that came out of that. One is a 10% cut. Right. The other is there was a lot of discussion about the ratio of employees to the number of residents. If you look at some of the cities that we used as benchmarking in the South especially that contracted with the Sheriff's Department, there was little or no savings involved in that. What they did is they did reduce their liability or risk from pension plans because they shifted that to the county, right, which is under FRS. So, but if you look at their number of employees, obviously it looks better than ours, but a lot of that is because they shifted, they didn't give up the service, they just shifted that to another organization. And
that's what it looked to me like. It was a pretty negligible gain for shifting that many employees. That's what it looked to me on the surface.
That is very, about 200 or a little less than 200,000. Yeah. And ongoing.
Yeah. And the question I was focusing on a little bit was, is there any, and it sort of appeared to me maybe we were shifting low-cost people off the books and putting weight, internal paper pushing work onto high-cost people, our sworn officers. Now, I don't know if that's true, Jim. I'm just, the implications were.
Well, the implications, the fact of the matter is, another one of the issues that we have discussed, I believe, at every committee meeting and city council meeting, we want to retain the 53 sworn positions.
Right.
And so this is based around that premise of doing that. But you're right, the officers, although under the technology that's being proposed and some of those improvements, they would be called upon to do more, but it would be through the electronic process as opposed to filling out paperwork. But we are shifting that type of workload onto the officer. But the other thing we're doing is that we're closing our safe haven, which is obviously the police department, because we would not have people there 24/7.
Yeah, I just wonder. I'm not saying it's happened, but it certainly looks like that over the longer period of time, high-cost people have a way of relaxing their workload and bringing lower-cost people back in to offset stuff they don't really want to do. So is it real cost savings, or are we just kidding ourselves? I know. No, I will answer that because I think it's a very true question. And when you bifurcate a department, i.e. the police department, I don't think long-term you're going to have savings. There's been no city that I know of that have contracted out and required the same level of service that was existing in the community. We have examples of some cities that said, I want a sergeant and I want a lieutenant on duty in my city, plus the number of officers to patrol the roads. Our officers are not so overpaid that they are that far less than what they're paying in the sheriff's department. So if you say that you want X number of deputies, and if we were going to contract out the entire
department and you say, I want 5 police officers or 5 deputies, you're not reducing your cost. And when we're saying that in the dispatch, we want our officers outside of the queue because we want to retain our response time, and our response time is extremely good in the city. That's going to require the sheriff's department to understand that we're going to be dispatched not in a regular queue, but in a dispatch that's going to, if it happens in the city, right away. And those are the type of discussions that have been taking place with the sheriff's department. So savings is not it. If there is a value to long-term risk exposure, i.e. pension plans, of having employees, then you mitigate that risk of having employees. And so that would be where your issue
I
is.
sort of saw that, but but looking at it from the public's point of view, and looking at it from the police officer's point of view, I don't know many police officers that really want to push paper. They're not. That's not what they trained for. They don't want to do that.
And it comes down to the type and level of service you want for your savings. We can say, as an example, and the police department's good because what we're doing there is really bifurcating the department. We're splitting it up, and we're saying we can allocate the dispatch. We'll get out of the animal control. We're paying for that through our tax dollars for the county anyway, so we'll do it. But using the animal control, let's take the police officer off the roll. The animal control in the county responds to cats and dogs. Our animal control, if you have a bobcat that runs through and we have older citizens who are concerned about those type of critters running through their yards, we send somebody out and talks to that person. The same goes in maintenance of parks. I mean, it's easy to contract. What we do is we reduce our risk, and in the mowing contract that we just signed, we actually reduced our cost, but we are getting calls in areas where the grass is growing up around sidewalks, and we go to the contractor and say, hey, you need to do that. Eventually you need to cut it a little more frequently, has a value, and that's going to be a cost that we will be picking up. And I guess what it is the key is to find that median as to what it is in our expectations as citizens and residents of our city. The saving of money is one thing that we can do, and we have the ability to do that. In the budget you have seen in front of you, I think the cover memo from me to the council says to accomplish the 10.9%, we can't do that without some major policy changes. We were very fortunate to get even close to 6%. And if you'll notice in there, that's still 31 employees. 10 of those are out of Public Works. Well, you're not going to reduce the Public Works by 10 employees and not expect to see something change. And so those are the little things, and it may be something that we cut and then it changes. And what you're saying is over time, then, well, I don't want to do this and I don't want to do that, or I want that. It's like the drive-in window that finance will be experiencing. In the city of Vero Beach, one of the unique things is it only takes about 4 people to stand up here and convince all of us that we were all wrong, and we make a 180-degree turn, which is democracy and is very good, don't get me wrong. And so I can assure you that we have in excess of 4 people who drive through the drive-in window. And another unique thing about Vero Beach, it's not really unique because we're a small city, a great majority of our utility customers pay their bills at the customer service counter. And many of those are elderly, and they will come down and they'll want to jaw and talk with the customer service people. We may or may not have time to do that anymore because we're going to. And the other unique thing, and using, now that I have Cindy's department on the line here, the person who takes your bill where you make a payment can't be the same person who sits down and talks to you about your concerns about being overcharged in water, sewer, or electric. And so you're going to have 2 people to carry out that function. And so there's a mandatory, and in her department upstairs, can't have the same person taking the money and accounting for the money in the accounts receivable. So you've got to have that type of separation that is taking place. What we are trying to do, and what we've attempted to do in this proposal, is really get down and show people how close to the bone we really are. And the recreation department's done a very good job of telling people, take the lifeguards. And since we brought that up earlier, in our proposed budget, what we've done is we've reduced the hours at one of the beach, 3 hours a day, but all 3 beaches are going to have lifeguard coverage 7 days a week, 365 days out of the year. And we reduced a couple hours on the other beaches by starting later and ending a little earlier. But we have guarded beaches in order to accommodate the concern that we were, at one time the proposal was we would leave one unguarded and you'd rotate around type of thing. So we have those guarded beaches. But, taking lifeguards as an example in the recreation, they have very little support cost. That is a totally labor-intensive cost. So if we're going to reduce that cost, hours are the only place you can get it.
Well, I looked at the police department, and if you really look at it, they have less than a 10% of their budget allocated for anything other than salaries and wages.
Well, absolutely.
So,
Gasoline's a very small part.
I'm surprised they could even drive the cars around. I figured it out. The monthly car bill is I don't know how many cars we have in the police department, but it's
We've
less
reduced those.
How many?
We've reduced what the exact number is, but we're about 10 down.
I couldn't determine, but when I looked at it on a manpower basis, it's probably less than I spend on gas myself driving around the city. So the police department is really, really thin on costs over above salaries. There clearly are. The thing that I maybe disagree with how we're presenting the police department is the incremental cost for the Indian River County deal is in operating costs, not in payroll costs. Well, it's really just the left-hand shift to the right-hand. It's really payroll costs covered by another deal. And so it really understates, in my humble opinion, our real cost to run a department on the payroll side. Because you got it down below, you got it in operating expenses, right?
Because it's a contractual service. At that point, essentially what we've done is outsourced it, same as if we had a private contractor doing it.
But it's still a shift of payroll. It's...
But it is a net savings. I think what Jim is saying is that, we were tasked with at least attempting to come up with 10.9%. We didn't quite make it all the way there, and we've left those. The budget is balanced at the place where we have it now. But certainly, in order to do that in the general fund, even $200,000 or $150,000 makes a difference towards the goal. So, certainly as we sit with council next week and go through this, I keep reminding everyone this is the beginning of a process, certainly, and not the end of one. Next week is a workshop, and we won't be actually adopting a budget till September. So certainly there are a number of policy decisions and issues to work through between now and then.
Well, we have embedded cost. For example, with the dispatchers, even though they're not going to be there, we still got to heat and air condition the space. Otherwise, mold gets in there, and it's the building we have to maintain.
Yeah.
It's sort of like walking through this building. You have all these offices where Cindy has now moved all of her offices around over there and made them more efficient. And she's also speculated for the future. When we sell the electric utility, we probably only have one person in purchasing, and that person will be here. We'll give up that 3 people, and then we'll give up that building at the airport, but they will all come in this direction. And Monty's doing the same thing down in his area. But what happens is that we move everybody in together. We have these spaces, and you still got to heat and air conditioned. And so you reduce the number. Again, I guess the point I'm making is the person is the cost more than the space.
Yeah, but I absolutely share that with you, because I had that same concern over stranded assets. Yeah. Stranded assets, whether they have all these police cars, some of their lease and whatever, that I don't know whether you're going to be compensated for those, back for the lease. You have all of the computers, all of the backup equipment that is presently in the existing communications operation is going to be abandoned, I presume. You're not going to reuse it.
Anything associated with the dispatch center will be abandoned unless it's technology we can transfer to the sheriff's department.
Yeah, but that's my point. Just a quick across the board. You're going to have abandoned assets. You're going to have sunk costs. You're going to have stranded assets that are going to have
That
to
room will still be
going
there.
to have to be covered. Secondly, talking to the chief, if anyone is laid off, you have to pay immediately sick vacation costs. You have to pay unemployment, do you not?
Those are actually incorporated in the budget. If you look at the non-departmental part
I
of,
did.
and that's why when you look at the analysis we provided, and I'm sorry, I just wasn't. We're going to get into this, but if you look at the analysis we provided, the amount we fell short of the goal of cuts is actually about $300,000 better in the following fiscal year because of those one-time costs for separation. So they're in there, but they won't be in there every year.
Yeah, well, my point is that the upfront costs to lay off the people in the police department, to get to your point, shifting low-grade work to high-grade work, which is absolutely true, sunk cost, and then in the next several years, Chief Curry has previously, as he did last year, and you working with him, are going to have some potentially major high-level retirements. Mm-hmm. And in that case, those are really, if there is a sergeant, a lieutenant, or a captain, or any combination thereof, you're talking some major. And then I thought that the chief and you were looking at restructuring to when those events occur. So that saving could well be more in the next couple of years than what the savings would be in removing dispatch. I mean, that's just an observation. But I think it's worthwhile looking at in terms of what the services that the police department, as I said, look, all the 20,000 people that are coming on the 4th of July, that this police department is serving the entire community, not only the city of Vero Beach. And in terms of the services, the amenities, the tourists, and so some comparisons between head count and city size is really skewed because of the number of tourists, the number of visitors, the number of county extended who are coming every day, which really, when you begin to look at head count of employees to actual residents, is somewhat misleading in my view.
Mr. Chairman, the other thing that's a little misleading is that, for example, people have compared us to Sebastian and said, look at the number of employees. They have about 3,000 more population. But you ask Al Minner, does he teach tennis lessons up there? I mean, that's the farthest thing from. So the key is also the services that we provide. And that's a values question for the community as to what is it that we want to provide and the acreages that we want to maintain in a park-like setting, and then define park-like setting is the other issue. Because the county saved a considerable amount of money when they contracted out their county parks, and for mowing and maintenance. If you go and, I mean, you just go up to the tracking station and walk 2 blocks down to J.C. Park, and you see 2 different parks and 2 different maintenance functions that are taking place.
Round Island as well.
Yeah, but I like the ones that are, within a walking distance, which is good exercise for everyone to get out, and you can see the difference. The question is what is the level of service that we want, demand, or require in the city of Vero Beach?
But it's still got to be a balance between the labor costs we're up against and the operational costs to support them. And when you look at some of the operational costs well below 10%, you gotta wonder if some of our police department are driving around cars that are pretty well beat up, and maybe they're not getting the training they should. And the question would be, should we have fewer people in the police department, but more support for the police department? And by that I mean training, and the ammo budget's $5,000. It's nothing. You can't buy a You can't buy a box of shells if you divide it up by police officers.
But they do meet minimum standards of the state requirements.
I guess
So we
they're
do.
right. They're out
And
there.
on the police cars, one of the things, the shop maintains our police cars, so we have very little downtime. But they do have a lot of miles. I mean, one of the lieutenants came by when I was standing out in the yard, and he and I were talking. He had 118,000 miles on the vehicle that he was driving. But the fact of the matter is, he was driving it, and
And they actually those vehicles replacements too, if you're looking, are actually in the
looked at it.
one
There's
cent.
some-
They're in the
several
5-year.
departments,
They're in the 5-year
140,000.
capital program.
At least two departments, right?
Yeah, they're in the 5-year capital program, but the police department's really focused in the last few years on, rather than leasing things, they've done a really good job of finding, used vehicles appropriate to the usage and actually doing much better in terms of the dollars they spend for
Fleet
replacements.
management group take care of the police department cars, or
yes,
they do.
Yes. One of the problems that we're finding, we would like to contract out the fleet management, but for example, the companies we've talked to, nobody wants to touch police cars because of the liability exposure, so we have issues there. But yes, our fleet maintenance takes care of police cars. That's one of the reasons, and I will say this is the first city I've been in that we actually buy used police cars, but we do that, and it seems to be working for us.
For detective vehicles and things
Yeah.
like that.
I noticed that in at least one department, maybe two, we had a fleet of cars being purchased, about 145,000 going on this year in the budget in the operating statements.
Yes, sir, we do, and some of our pickup trucks got major mileage on those that we've.
I saw, like 60 trucks. There's a lot of trucks to keep up. So,
Well, I'm not really sure that one-time costs should be that much of a consideration. Otherwise, other businesses wouldn't be downsizing or changing the way they operate. We are in a changing environment, and we have to respond to new technologies. And
we agree with you.
we can't keep doing things the way we did. But
Trust me, we don't do that anymore. We don't do things we used to.
But obviously, there would be some stranded costs. But evidently, it's seen as worthwhile, to have one-time costs to go forward with savings.
The long-term risk is what you've got to throw into the equation. And what are you reducing that reduces, maybe not this year or the next year, but
The bigger philosophical issue, though, when I look at the budget, it's not my forte. It's the city council's. But you look at it and you say, all right, we're doing a good job of cutting costs. I think the city has done a good job of cutting costs over the last several years. But there comes a point at which you can no longer can cut costs. You cannot cut costs at some point. And we're close to that now when you look at some of the costs. The bigger issue is, how do we grow the city? How do we grow the city's revenue base? When we lose the power plant, where is the revenue growth? And when I look at, for example, the Department of Zoning Department, I'm a realtor. I can drive around town and tell you there is an awful lot of old, beat-up houses that do not become even close to meeting standards. And we do have portions of the city that are flat in decay that our planning and zoning department is so constricted, it can't do much. And I, for one, have tried to interface with Tim on several occasions. And I think Tim does an excellent job. He does a good job for the city. But he is very restricted on what he can get done, not only because of his staff, but because of sort of the archaic rules and regulations that he has to go through to get anything done. And to some extent, that throws off negative to the city. It throws off the potential for growth. So what this budget doesn't it doesn't address somehow is where's the growth? I look at Europe, and we have done a great job of crushing austerity program down in Europe. But hell, they got unemployment at 14, 15%. Children at 20% unemployment. America's got 20% unemployment. Where's the growth? I mean, when I look at this,
Well,
where do we get it?
coming back to your growth issue and the older areas of town, the other little philosophical thing, I mean, we're a pretty conservative community. Part of that conservatism is I have property rights.
I know.
You come tracing onto my property,
I know.
and so we have a real issue with that. But our growth potential is not unlike probably 80% of the communities in the state of Florida right now. Annexation is a historical event in most cases. The state has sort of prevented that from occurring. You have to get concurrence with the county. And in most counties, they don't want to do that because they lose part of their tax base. So you have issues there. It really comes down, Glenn, as to what do we as a community want to pay for in our expectation of services. Just like your newspapers, just like the loaf of bread at the grocery store, believe it or not, those prices have gone up over time.
Yep.
And you look at our taxes, and there is right. And you look at us, and all of our looking at other communities when we start talking about it, that we have the electric system, and if it goes away, we become like a Sebastian, or we become like Port St. Lucie or any other community, and their growth potential. Port St. Lucie's a little exception to that because they are growing and expanding because St. Lucie County allows for some of that, but also the tax rate has changed over time, and that has occurred, and that's where your revenues come for services that are being demanded. And
But even if you get a reasonable uptick in your real estate taxes, you're really not growing your real estate base. You're just
You are growing your real estate base because, for example, using the police, since we had them on the line, public safety is a major influence in people reinvesting and investing in a community.
no question about that.
And
You're right.
and in our community, we have our assessed value is very good, and we are one of the few communities, I bet, especially in this general area, that have $3, $4, $5, $7 million houses still under construction. Mm-hmm. And you can bet that those people who invest that much money into one of those structures have in their mind some sense of security that's going to take place. So the reinvestment comes based on the quality of what the quality of life in the community is. And so if you continue to maintain a high presence of public safety, i.e. police, mm-hmm. if you maintain a very good quality of water and sewer service, if you maintain a good quality that your garbage gets picked up and I don't have to worry about it polluting somebody, and you get right down to the basics and the roads are passable, and if I want to get to and from, I don't have to go through potholes. Those are the things that have to be provided. And those costs, it's like potholes. The cost of asphalt has risen over time because fuel oil, which is part of that cost. So we as a community have to say that one of these days we may, instead of paying $2 for that pothole, it's going to cost us $3 for that pothole. We can blame the guy that's putting the pothole mix down, and he is a high part of the cost. But if we want the pothole mix put down, you're going to have to pay somebody to do that. And that's really where you cut through the thing. And in the city of Vero Beach, we have become accustomed to that. Now, the bad guy is because you're paying high electric rates. If you were paying low electric rates, you may not have those potholes, and you may not have 53 police officers if we'd started that 20 years ago.
Well, it's certainly going to take an education program for many people.
Yes, sir, it will be.
It's going to be a tough education program because when you really analyze these budgets pretty carefully, if you get through this cut this next year, you got a pretty thin budget going forward.
It is, and you will start seeing the changes in what we do. But coming back to your earlier statement, the higher paid people, if we want to call it the higher paid people, start doing the lower paid work plus their work, then eventually something happens and you may not hire that person again, because one of the things Cindy and I have talked about, a hiring freeze is the key to success in many cases to stabilize your organization. But high grass on sidewalks or around sidewalks may be something that we will expect and assume will be there.
Well, it's pretty clear we're moving forward pretty aggressively, and this is an aggressive budget going forward. No question about it. The police department is thin, on operating costs over and above labor costs. Our eyes to the world and development, our planning and zoning department, and planning and development is pretty thin.
We're losing a person under this proposed budget.
Is that right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's pretty thin going forward to help the city grow. And I'm certainly not saying we should aggressively pursue some of these older neighborhoods because we need low-cost housing. If we're not going to have wage increases in America, I guess we're going to have low-cost housing. And we're not going to replace it, so we're going to have to keep it. But still, P&Z is our only outlet.
It is. And one of the things, I think we've come to a crossroads in Vero Beach that we have historically been and considered ourselves sort of a real diamond in the area. And, when I was served in Oak Ridge, we had a similar situation. We had more PhDs and chemists and scientists, and around us was Roane and Anderson County, and they were lucky to be hillbillies with running water, fellow Tennesseans, because that's where I grew up. And so Oak Ridge was one of those communities that we did things a little higher in cost than anybody else did. And in Vero Beach, I think the fact of the matter is, historically speaking, we've expected more as Vero Beachians. And we have, it's unusual. It's very unusual for a city our size to have 3 beaches that are guarded. But somewhere along the line, we said we want to have our beaches first class. We are one for 15,000 population, to have 53 officers, to have 5 people on a shift. And we can make the discussion, well, we've got the beach community and we got the mainland sea. Our officers are sort of restricted by 2 bridges. But the fact is, we chose to do that. We also chose that we're going to have one of the largest parks for a city of 15,000, Riverside Park, and we're going to maintain it in a form and a fashion that makes it look outstanding. And then to complement that, we have 3 gorgeous parks on the ocean with JC, Hummelson, and South Beach, and we say that we're going to do those. And we've done things first class. Mm-hmm. And the question is, and I hate to use this analogy, but I think it's a matter of fact, you have the Walmart syndrome and you have the Macy's syndrome. And a lot of people are becoming Walmartians real quick. And even Macy's in some cases are coming down to the Walmart people. But in the city of Vero Beach, what we've tried to do is to adapt our budget to try to retain as much of that cultural heritage as that we've had. But you can only go so far, and then, and it is a tight budget. One of the issues that you have under these type and austere budgets is every little blimp you will see. For example, the issues that Cindy and I sort of faced when we first came here about we had to have this gigantic budget amendments at the end of the year because nobody traced it through the year. One of these days, $153,000 for a dune renourishment that is washed away because of a storm, we may have to say, guys, we don't have it. And we'll just have to wait till the following year to figure out where we're going to get $153,000.
Well, let me just make a comment between what happened with the taxes. 2007, the taxes collected were in the city of Vero Beach, $12,395,000. Page 134 of the capita. This year, it's $10 million. Since 2007, it's $2,387,000 in lost taxes. Now, that is a big number in terms of the finances of the city. And
10.9% represents $2.2 million.
And there was a higher millage rate in 2007 And of course, obviously, the property taxes were higher. But that is, I just think, one component, because I think, Catherine, you mentioned it at our last meeting, that there is an aversion to raising any taxes.
Yeah, and I'm not sure why, but I know my taxes are low. You keep saying this. If people want services, they're either going to have to pay a user fee to use them, or they're going to have to pay more in taxes. And we're paying more in utilities, so, if we pay less in utilities, we can pay more in taxes. So I'm not sure.
I will tell you, we are trying to turn over every stone we can. We're talking to a company that got the advertising contract with the county on the GO Line buses. Maybe we can put, and what this gentleman's telling me is that we can put advertising on our lifeguard stands, and it represents enough that could maybe offset some of the cost of our lifeguards on additional hours. So I just want the general public to know that we are trying to look at whatever options and alternatives. And no, I do not want, Joe's Hair Care on the side of a pickup truck with the City of Vero Beach seal on it. But I think there may be a way of coming down to what is a practical way of raising some revenues that will offset some of those reductions that we're doing. And we are trying to do that. And we open our doors to any ideas that people may have. We will certainly try to work through that.
Where did the 10.9% figure come up, or how was that?
The May 14th budget, that is the number that would be reduced if we sold the electric system. Whenever it sells, that would be the reduction in contributions back to the general fund with no additional revenue supplement to go in that. And the decision was made is to try to hit that 10.9 one time, and that would be October the 1st, 2013, and we wouldn't have to go through the pain and agony by talking about it for the next few years. As you know, we had some discussion about doing 5, 5, and 5, and so this was sort of the discussion at that meeting.
Okay, but on your models, Peter, didn't you discuss that it would be a combination of raising taxes and cutting budget some?
No, in the model, and the model assumed a 1/1/14 close date. So that was the model. What I had done in the model was to say there were various paying off the pension and so forth. If everything was in taxes, without doing the others, without putting in any economies, that was the number that I put, and I believe it was about a 40% increase in tax. It was about a $1.5 million shortfall.
And, actually, I think our numbers match back on the 10.9. The 10.9% is the $2.2 million. That's the gap that's remaining after you pay off the unfunded pension liability.
Right.
We still needed another 2.2, and that represents about 10.9% of the budget, the baseline budget as it stood. Which at our millage rate, we raised a little over $4 million. So essentially, $2 million is half of that.
And one of Peter's ideas was to come up and do more contribution from the existing enterprise funds because of the savings they would make in the pension. The problem we have with that, taking water and sewer as an example, when we sell the electric system, they're going to be picking up a higher cost of the customer service, meter reading, and that kind of stuff because they won't be sharing that. We'll still have to have the same meter readers because of the number of meters that we will have. So they will have a higher expense. The other thing is that by shifting that's what got us into trouble with the electric utility. And my concern is we start becoming dependent upon water and sewer and sanitation and those type of things, then one of these days somebody comes along and says, well, you can't compete in price on water and sewer, or your garbage rates are too high, or whatever the case may be. And so I'm one of those more prone to, not to be in conflict with Mr. Chairman, but the fact is that those costs associated, and if there are savings, For example, in water and sewer, I'm hoping that when the sale goes through that there'll be substantial electric, water, and sewer savings. Now, our competitor, and it is a competitor, they're going to see a lot of those same savings we are. So we've got to maintain that rate if we're going to be in that business.
Well, I don't know. The competitor has Florida Power and Light now, I believe, our competitors.
Some of them do, some of their costs.
But
not
our
all.
immediate competitor,
Yeah.
which is the
not
county.
not all of theirs is. Some of it is city of Vero Beach.
Well, the bottom line, though, is that the 1.7 million, which is the current electric bill, utility bill for water sewer, at 20%, that's $350,000 savings, if it's 20%. In addition, with the work that I had talked to Rob Bolton on Friday, and that was the number that he provided to me.
Yeah, one of
I
the numbers
also
was
talked to him
last night,
about the sludge plant that's going to take in our no discharge system to take sludge, which is now being paid to be carried away in a investment which is going to turn it into fertilizer to be sold, compost, in a closed system.
We'll still have cost associated, but it'd be a substantially lower cost for disposal.
The bottom line is that, but that process itself and the other optimizations that they're doing in water sewer that's planned. He is also looking over the next few years to go down a substantial percentage in the number of employees. So there are embedded future potential reductions in water sewer.
And that's where we want to stay competitive. Also in
Absolutely.
the sanitation, there's going to be a position lost in sanitation in order to maintain our pricing that we can be very competitive, and we have at least two other major competitors in our area. But those utilities return money back to general fund, so in my opinion, we ought to stay in those. I realize that there's a philosophical thing, the government shouldn't be making profits, but the fact of the matter is if we shift everything to the property tax, and very few cities do that, then you do have some challenges. For example, our good friends in Sebastian, they not only have property tax, but they also have a stormwater utility tax. It represents about $1 million a year. So, and to me, our method by which to raise revenues appears to be a little more fair if we can stay competitive in pricing. And I understand that we have to maintain that rate and the quality of service remaining.
Well, actually, the water sewer rates in the city in the aggregate are lower than the county.
We didn't lose any money going to
We made money
county
going
rates
to the county rates.
in Indian River Shores. And we've offered the same to South Beach.
Okay, so just to recap, if I may,
Sure.
to understand this, we would need to raise taxes 50% to cover the cost of the loss of the revenue for the power plant.
If everything was taken out of taxes, no other efficiencies and no other economies were made.
Right, okay.
Yeah, that-
However, 50%, you're really only, City of Vero Beach is roughly 10% of a total tax bill. Isn't that correct? So really your total tax bill would only go up 5%? Is that what I'm to understand?
So
Yeah,
approximately.
maybe less. I calculated. Yeah,
Approximately,
Yeah.
just for round numbers.
wouldn't be a disaster. No.
We're about 2 mils out of 18 last year, or 17 last year. There's actually and you make an excellent point. I think when people hear a tax increase number like that, they envision it being their entire tax bill.
Right.
And if you look at, it's actually on page 136 of the CAFR, you can see all the overlapping rates, school board, county, et cetera. The city is 2 mils out of 17. So that's an excellent
Okay.
point to make.
Well, I thought from the get-go that it was going to be a combination of raising taxes and trying to cut, but it's unrealistic. We're at the tail end of a recession. We've already been cutting for the past years, and to think that we're going to cut 10.9% without drastically cutting the services that we're used to is unrealistic in my mind. And I think it's got to be a combination of the two, and somebody just doesn't want to make the hard decision and say that.
Well, I think I think you're correct, but I also think the value judgments we're making are not all in sync. I think I think clearly we need to maintain high police department ratios for business reasons. I think we need to keep low real estate taxes. They're drivers of business. They help people come in. So we do need to get the cost down as best we can. It's a balancing act, I think, and I sort of suspect we're testing this year to see if we can get this low and how it's going to impact us. And I don't know that it is cut in stone where we're going. I think this is a test year to see how we get through this and how does it perform, you know. I think a lot of people, in not just the city, but across the country, Americans believe government's got too fat. It's not just at the federal level. It's at the state level. It's the county level. There are too many regulations. And I think the public has got to see governments begin to take control of the budgets. And I think that this is a prime example of doing it. And we may overreact. We may have gone too far, but we won't know until we've done it. That's sort of my feeling. I think it's good that we've tried, myself. I am concerned about the quality balance. In the police department, I saw it. I'm a little concerned about that. I was a little concerned. We're seeing it in planning and zoning. We're seeing it we're seeing some, what I think is quality shifts in making these guys do lower echelon work because we've lost the lower echelon people. So I don't know how it'll come out. It's going to be an interesting philosophical issue.
It certainly is, and as Cindy pointed out, this is just the beginning, and these type of conversations are important. And I think the key is, and this is mine and Cindy's job, probably more mine than hers, is that we've got to convince groups like you as citizens of our community that we are running efficiently. If I can't convince you four people, then there's no way I'm going to convince the 15,000 other people in the community. And so what we're trying to do is to do that. And that's why in our budget proposal that we sent out, we try to get as detailed as we can. We try to put everything on our website and answer any questions that people have as it goes forward. The idea of doing the monthly reports, the monthly financial reports, people get to see those. If we're not building a vote of confidence in those, I don't know how we're going to do it. It may be just a philosophical thing that government's bad and government's got to go away type of thing. And Glenn, what you said about having too many rules and regulations, the city of Vero Beach did have those, and we self-imposed them. But when I read back on the history of what took place, it's because we wanted that. We decided that on the beachfront, we didn't want the high rise where they're going to pay a lot of taxes and so many units. We decided we wanted to have vegetation and as much beachfront as possible where people can walk up. And so those were choices that we made in that value added. And the question is how do we want to go from here? And I don't think it's a question of can we afford it or not. The question is, do I feel as a citizen of Vero Beach, am I getting a value added to my quality of life when I pay a tax? I mean, it's really basically that simple. And if I can't relate to what I'm paying to what I'm receiving, then it's a lost value, because we're all not going to go play tennis, so we're not worried about the lady that's organizing the tennis things. But at the same time, we all don't call police officers. Some do more than others. And so they place more value in that. Some people are more concerned about the sidewalks, especially if I have a kid that goes to an elementary school and needs to walk along the street and I live within 1 mile of the school. I want to have a safe pattern for them. And so everybody has a different value that they place on the services. But this is a very good exercise for the community. You've been going through for the last 5 years before Cindy and I got here. There were reductions being made, and we've cut this city, by what, 20%? Would you say, Cindy, at least? Yeah. I mean, you've gone down an unbelievable number of folks, and we've been able to hang on and maintain that quality that I guess, is an expectation. And
this is where CAFRs come in handy on page 146, 147. The total staffing citywide, including all the utilities, in 2003 was 549 people, and as of the end of 2012, it's down to 451.
And then you stop and think about how we're staffing so many more committees than they did, even though I think just a few years back, the council was going to come in, we're going to do away with some committees. But in fact, I think we've put more emphasis on our commissions and committees. And the city clerk's office, that's a person that has to do that. And we've opened up all of our meetings, no matter if it's a city manager's meeting or a committee or whatever. And we've opened all of that up. Our website has become, just an unbelievable amount of information. And the irony of that is the guy that runs our website is a part-time employee.
The other concern, Scott, I happened, my personal feeling is that 10.9 is too ambitious in one fell swoop, particularly if, in fact, it's going to save $2 million and you don't close on 1/1/14. You are throwing an enormous amount of surplus. At the same time, you're reducing services. So I think that perhaps it would be considered to not go at flank speed, but to understand as we go through the budget process when a closing date would be better clarified. What obviously the input from the community in terms of what, and as you're saying, everyone's going to have their own ox to gore, that they're going to come to the council meetings and say whether it's public works or whether it's recreation or whether it's solid waste or whatever, everyone is going to bring their own. And that's going to have to be considered, balanced, and responded to by the city council and their determination as directionally where they want to go.
And then we've also got to consider, you've got to have that support. It's like Cindy and I have talked many times. I don't think we're going to have a bunch of people with eye shades coming in here and say we need our finance department.
It's never the finance department. You notice that?
And but you've got to have a finance department. If you employ a person, somebody's got to write the check for it. And that goes for purchasing. Somebody's got to make sure that we're following all the purchasing legislation and requirements when we do, because the first thing you're accused of is you gave it to your brother-in-law or your cousin or somebody else's brother-in-law and cousin. So when we do our, the bid specifications, we try to make it where everybody gets to bid. And you've got to have a professional person who actually does that. And when we seal our plans for streets, you've got to have a professional engineer. And it's
asset management. We talked about that earlier. I mean, the undertaking that it was to do a physical inventory, and then for the limited staff I already have to translate that into the proper cleanup of the books. I mean, asset management is a huge challenge, and with fewer people, that's again something that doesn't get done as frequently or as well. My bigger concern in a finance department is, and you alluded to this earlier, internal controls. I mean, you all know as finance people, there's a certain minimum amount of people I have to have in order to keep separation of duties and internal controls as protection, and that becomes incredibly difficult when you have, essentially 4 people doing everything for the city. So it's definitely a concern.
And then we start responding to catastrophes because the newspaper writes that one of our purchasing people embezzled something, to come to find out the guy wasn't even degreed or had no experience. We just hired the cheapest guy we could off the street. And I didn't mean that against John O'Brien. He's very qualified, but I'm using it as an example. But if you start filling those spots with folks that do not have that qualification, then what you do is you just have a continuum of issues.
Of the $4 million in taxes, how much of that is, do you know, from business versus residential?
I've never actually gotten that kind of detail. I think at one point when we were talking about the downtown district, the business improvement district, I may have some of those details when we were working on the numbers there, but I don't have them readily available. But I could look into that.
I thought it was about 25%.
Yeah, I don't recall.
Yeah. Can I ask another question on the same budget? getting into the mundane here, but on our marina, it's a little strange too. What's going on in the marina? It looks like we've shifted gears a little bit.
We have shifted gears a considerable amount.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed we shifted. We dropped.
The moorings versus.
Yeah, something about there was.
They had it split between.
Yeah, there was a.
Are you
On
talking about people?
our docks, we're down. The budget going forward, we're down 35,000 on dock rentals, transit costs. And then we're down on the south 60,000.
We did actually shift just
Where
the
did it
accounting. We just shifted the accounting on some of those line items. It wasn't actually a decrease.
I didn't see any pickup in line items.
Yeah, I wasn't prepared to talk to the 13-14 budget in detail today, but we did some shift in the accounting.
And I know our diesel fuel and our gas fuel are exactly the same budget. There's a little incongruency there.
And I will say this: the Marina Commission actually went through the draft version of the budget in great detail. You know, Tim's undertaken some serious staffing reductions to try to do what we talked about earlier, which is right the ship with regard to not having grant money to help pay debt service.
The revenue is projected to come up. The bottom line revenue.
That is right, and their balance forward is they're improving in their net assets. And the key is we are making that, but I think we're also adapting the numbers to what the realism and what the real numbers are. I think there's been some. It's sort of like when we inherited the police department. We had 10 positions that they called unbudgeted but positions for the police department, and so you looked at the numbers and it looked like we had all these police officers, but they were never budgeted. But the theory was as if somebody found some money, you could go out and hire a police officer. And in the marina, we had some projections of revenues that were not as realistic and not categorized as appropriately as we think.
I'll tell you the other thing that the Marina Commission has had conversations about over the course of the meetings we've had with them is they're vigorously pursuing additional revenue sources.
Correct.
They've got some great ideas on how to enhance revenue, large and small. And the bottom line of their recommendation regarding this particular budget was that there's going to be some dialing back of operating hours, et cetera. They're going to try it, and they're going to see if it causes any issues with their customers. And in the meantime, they're going to do their best to identify some new revenue sources, and if need be able to put back some of the support so that they don't impact the good reputation that they have right now.
And that's a pretty severe cut in people, too, running the marina.
Oh, yes.
I mean, when
Severe
I looked at
cut.
it, that's pretty tough.
Yeah, and they have, we used to provide to the assistant marina director housing. He paid a rent, but it was a very small amount. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. We're going to put that on the market as a rental spot and take our employees out of it. So.
Right.
Green Commission and has been very engaged in this process for the last 6 months. So yeah, they had a big line item by line item review of that. So.
Well, I think I went through the budget pretty carefully, and it seems to me you got a pretty tight budget. At least that's my observation there. Yeah.
Good.
I've always, I've basically been living in the city, so I don't see I don't know about a tax bill for a county resident, but do they have the same millage rates we have, except we have the city on top of that? So we pay everything someone in the county pays and then a little extra.
They will have a municipal taxing unit pricing on some of their services that we may not pay. So and if you look at the county taxes, they're part of that 17. They have broken down a lot of their services into various taxes.
Right.
So I just wondered, in providing some quality services for ourselves, whether we're paying for services from the county that we never get anything from, and then shouldn't maybe they reimburse us something for services we're not using.
I wouldn't hold my breath for reimbursement, but the issue is that probably 60% of the people using our parks are not.
That's what I would think, that we're paying for all these other
Well, and another
that
number.
we're paying the same taxes in the county that they're paying.
Well, another number that sticks out is the tourism tax. 56% of the tourism tax is collected within the corporate limits of the city. Very little of that money, if any, is spent actually in the city, except at the Chamber of Commerce. But for dune restoration, when we made that request, it was obviously denied. But those numbers go directly to the county, and they disperse it
Why is that? Why does it go directly to the county?
Under state law, they have the right to that disbursement of tourist tax. And sitting on the tourism board is Fellsmere, Sebastian, ourselves, and the county residents. One of the ironies of that is count the number of hotel rooms in Fellsmere.
And certainly there's some
Coming back
revenue
to-
there available for things like dune restoration, and even, I've worked in places where those tourist taxes, certain portions of them are eligible to be used for bricks and mortar projects as well. And
Absolutely.
and we've got some, looming costs facing us for things like Royal Palm Point, and so again,
And there's no way we can change that?
state law.
State law.
Well, I can't say you can't change state law, but by state law they are.
You have to get your state representatives to endorse that. I'm not sure that will happen. There's
Just Debbie Mayfield out there.
There's too many irons in that fire right now that if, for example, the Sebastian Chamber receives money, the Indian River County Chamber receives money. So there's a lot of ways that's divvied up, and we would just be another iron in that fire. So.
I'd like to see a way that users from the county could get charged for some things that, I'm subsidizing as a Vero Beach taxpayer.
Well, one of the things that we have, but it would also apply, one of the things that we got is some grants for a lot of our parks. And under those grant provisions, I cannot charge one person more than another person for the use of those facilities. But we are proposing that we have a charge for rental of the 2 and 3 top pavilions in our parks. Because one of the things that we do is that the guy that cleans up the parks on Saturdays and Sunday mornings, one of the little roles that he plays is that we have a lot of people at 7 o'clock in the morning go out and put this caution tape around because that's where their family, because you don't reserve it right now. And sometimes there's a conflict between two families wanting to have a birthday party, and so the guy that's picking up the litter also goes over and says, "Wait a minute, who's caution tape?" and works out a lot of those little details that are there. And so that is a cost. And so we are proposing, and through the Recreation Commission, charges for the use of those pavilions. And that way we sort of reduce some of our overhead on that. And I think we projected 31,000. We have never done it before, so that's out of the blue, but based on the usage that we see in our parks, that those type of pavilions are in pretty high demand right now.
Jim, not to belabor the part, but coming back to the police department a little bit on this contractual relationship. I presume we're getting into a contract that has got extended terms, and sort of a fixed contract over the next 5 years.
I'm not sure it'll be fixed, I think, but yes, it would be a long-term contract. We would envision that a minimum of 5 years because of the
CapEx.
transition. Yes, the capital. Yeah.
But by the same token, and I've been in that, but all of a sudden now we're captive to that department. So our exit costs can be very expensive if it doesn't work out. And our transition times for exiting can be difficult.
Correct.
I've never been real keen on being a captive of somebody else. And that's where we'll be a little bit, right?
That is true. Anytime you contract out and you give up a service, and using dispatchers is one, but let's say that we decided tomorrow we're going to get out of the sanitation business, picking up garbage. Once you get rid of that equipment, you're out of the business. I mean, and the same would go in dispatching. We would still have the room in there, but I will assure you that it's sort of like some of the empty space in this building. We're already doing weight testing on the floors because we're going to be bringing some of our files from out at the airport. Now, the negative to that, unfortunately for us, we own the airport, so when we vacate a building out there, airport revenues go down, and so I may have saved a couple of dollars in the city clerk's office, but I cost myself some money at the airport, and that's one of the little challenges we have. But yes, you become captive. You also become captive to whatever rates would happen in the future because, pay increases would be out of our control and overhead would be out of our control.
I presume some of our employees just went to the county.
No, sir.
They didn't.
No, we haven't made any transitions yet.
No, but I mean,
If it happened.
do you think that they can uptick, the county's going to uptick with no additional labor side on their?
I don't know that they've had that.
Their cost that we're going to be will be for that uptick or whatever and they would take some of our employees. They
That's
probably
what I'm talking.
take,
Some of our employees will find jobs.
Yes,
now
sir.
working
Yes,
for
sir.
the
It would
county.
not be a total layoff.
Yeah.
Some of our employees
Okay.
would find jobs.
But,
That's what I
you
thought.
make an excellent point, and I've worked for cities where the entire police department was outsourced as a contract to the county. What you do lose is control over pay increases and employment
Right.
associated costs completely, whereas if they remain your employees, you take the risk of pension liabilities and OPEB and all that down the road, but you at least have some control over those costs instead of them just being a pass-through, essentially.
Have we compared the county cost increases on payroll against ours? Do they do a better job than we do in terms of
I think they're in the
payroll
same
costs?
situation as
So
they've been-
they're not doing any better than we are.
it's.
So
We've been
whatever
flat.
we were going to incur going forward, we're probably going to incur in the contract someplace.
I'm not sure how you can do much better than
That is right. I mean, the fact of the matter is that somewhere along the line, there's going to have to be changes in compensation, or we're not going to be able to attract anybody to work for you. So you will be paying those additional costs when you contract that out.
Right.
And the same goes, for when you contract out any service that's.
Sure.
But there's a whole host of issues that have to be discussed in terms of response time, quality of service,
Oh, yeah.
coverage of the area, all of those, what the queuing would be. So it's more than just,
Oh, yeah.
just moving numbers around,
Oh, yeah.
but it's the real, as you say, philosophical issues in terms of what kind of service delivery do you want, what kind of response time do you want, in terms of if you're going to have an extra handoff, it's always going not to be as smooth if you're passing batons as opposed to running the race yourself.
It's very hard to measure the cost savings as a percent of something in terms of what's our return on cap, by
Yeah,
doing this.
right.
And because the cap costs are really personal, like you say, they're quality questions.
Well, I'll give you an example. It only happens 3 or 4 times a year. And it happens even more frequently, and I'll give you 2 scenarios. One is a spouse that's been abused, and they run to the police department, drive and go in, knock on the door, and the dispatchers let them in order to keep them from the abusing spouse. The other is that we have a lot of child care handoffs, i.e., you have a husband and wife that have split, and it's not really congenial in their split, and I get the son on a Thursday and you get him on a Wednesday. In order to keep the 2 spouses, and this happens even more frequently, they come into the police department and that handoff is taking place under sort of a controlled environment. And we will no longer be doing that because we won't, at night, we'll be locking up the police department. And a lieutenant may go in. Now, we will have the jail cells in the back that we will have open where you go through the carpooling thing. But even that, a dispatcher right now monitors those officers coming and going and sort of keeps an eye to make sure the security, because a lot of times it's one officer and one prisoner, and you bring them in, and it's sort of a backup security issue there. So those are the type of things that you can't measure that will be going away that you don't see. And those are, again, the value added. And it's a value added from the patrolman standpoint, or it's a value added from the spouse that may have run up to the police department at that particular time. To the average person, is that something we want to do? And the sheriff's department's pretty far out there from where the real population center is.
And that's the point I was trying to focus on. And see, when we give up these 14 or 15 people, that's the judgment we've made. And
Correct.
And it's a difficult one because those who are not going to get back, the sheriff's department's not going to pick that up. There's no question about that. Right. So it's a difficult equation.
It is very difficult
going forward.
And the unfortunate part is we are a very labor-intensive business. That's what we do. Our service is responding to people, and I don't care if it's in public works, if it's in engineering, if it's in customer service, wherever it is. We're not making widgets, unfortunately, because you can treat a widget any way you want to as it comes off the assembly line. Ours is our people, and The police department response time is not measured in the number of police officers. It's how long did it take you to get to my house?
Yeah, see, the value judgment is coming back to this. If there's a $200,000 savings in the police department, the question I had was, how do we get a $200,000 savings someplace else without doing that to the police department? That's the question I was trying to ask. That's why I come back to the recreation department. I love the chairman's analysis, but in my head, could we have lost $100,000 there? You know, could cut it to $100,000 more, and lose one sworn staff, and not lose 14 people that will handle these other.
You could change the frequency of
Mix.
mowing in the park and contract that out and save your $200,000, as an example.
Well,
But again, I want people to understand that that is a visual of the tracking station versus J.C. Park. And again, that's.
but I wasn't asking us to do that.
Oh, I know, but it is the value judgment that we're
Correct.
making. That's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah.
We are looking at that, and the two things that the dispatchers accomplish, and or two issues that were brought out at the May the 14th discussion. One is that per capita employee per capita of people. And the other is a price reduction, and don't be afraid to contract out. And we've been pursuing that.
And my analysis of the police department went a little further than that, because I looked at the police department and said, when I compare this to police department against others, what I see is we have a higher incident, higher quality police department against other departments. So again, what the other cities have done, they mitigated this cost by mixing a lower cost manpower alongside of the police department. So instead of having 80% high educated sworn officers, they had a 60-40 relationship or something like that.
And that discussion has come in some of the things. We have one of the higher educated police departments in the area.
Well
and
educated.
the comment's been made on a couple of occasions. Do we need this higher education? Do we need a clearance rate of 42% compared to 20%? If the crime's mine, I want it 40%.
I know.
If the crime's yours, I may have less of an incentive there.
I mean, but the reality of the budgets necessitate these type of questions. And as taxpayers, if we're going to talk to the city about reducing costs, then we have to understand what value judgments are we making to get those costs down.
And Glenn, the bottom line is you're not going to have anybody stand up here and say, raise my tax. Well, I take that back. During the discussion on the tennis person, people said, raise my rates. I do. But that's and so that's a judgment call that needs to be made by the leadership of the community,
I understand.
which includes you all.
Yeah, right? It's out of our realm, right?
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
that wasn't one of the parameters we were given as a potential for balancing the budget. So, yeah.
Call for a motion and close the meeting.
5:07. I will call for a adjournment.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Uh,